Okay, welcome to 11.4 and 11.5, multiplying and dividing integers. During this video, you are expected to be taking notes. The good news is you can push pause at any time and push play when you're ready. You can also rewind if you missed something or just need to hear it again. Okay, so we are doing these two lessons together because the same rules apply for both multiplying and dividing integers. A couple things to remember before we jump into it. The opposite of a negative is what? Yes, that's right, a positive. And the opposite of a positive is what, class? Good, a negative. These are the two most important concepts to keep in mind when we're working out these multiplication and division of integers problems. So my recommendation would be to do all the computation first, then use these ideas to help you figure out if your answer is a positive or a negative. Let's take a look at a simple example. Number 1, -4 times 3. So we would think of it as 4 times 3 is 12, and the opposite of a positive is a negative, making it a -12. Let's try another one. 2 times -5. Well, we know 2 times 5 is 10. Here's our negative, so we're going to think of that as opposite. Opposite of a positive is a negative. Now, let's take a look when we're multiplying two negatives, like -8 times -7. Well, we know that 8 times 7 is 56, and the opposite of a negative is a positive. So that means our answer would be positive 56. We can look at when we have a string of integers, like -10 times -2 times, say, -4. If we look at the computation first, 10 times 2 is 20, times 4 is 80, but the most important thing we have to make sure is we determine the sign of our answer. So we would think of it as the opposite of a negative is a positive, and the opposite of that positive is now a negative. Now, as you get more confident with these types of questions, you're going to notice a pattern with a number of negative signs and whether that determines your answer is positive or negative. But you'll have to figure that one out on your own. Let's try one more. If we did something like 2 times -3 times -6, well, 2 times 3 is 6, times 6 is 36. Well, the opposite of a positive would be a negative, and the opposite of that negative is a positive 36. Now you'll notice all these problems I gave you are for addition, but the same rules apply if it's division. So let's take a look at just a few division problems. Number 1, -18 divided by, let's just make it easy, -6. Well, 18 divided by 6 is 3, and the opposite of a negative makes our answer a positive 3. You will also see when you get to the textbook division setup, maybe something like this, Well, we just need to remember the fraction bar means what, class? Oh yes, division. So we would just say it as 25 divided by 5 is 5, and the opposite of that positive makes it a negative 5. Okay, so that's the basics of the lesson. But it does get a little bit trickier when we throw in things like exponents. So let's set up a section called exponents. And we can see how negatives play into exponents. There's two different ways that you're gonna see it, or you're gonna have to manage those exponents. Let's take a look at the first way. Okay. I want you to notice that the negative is inside the parentheses. That means it's the negative 5 that's squared. So it's going to look like negative 5 times negative 5, which is 25. Positive. The opposite of that negative is a positive 25. If we take a look at another one like that, we can put negative 4 to the third. Again, it's the negative that is in the parentheses. It is the negative 4 that is being cubed. So that's going to look like negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. If we multiply 4 times 4 times 4, we get a product of 64. Let's determine the sign. The opposite of a negative is a positive, and the opposite of a positive is a negative. Are you catching on to a pattern yet? Okay, now, again, these negative symbols were inside the parentheses. That won't always be the case. We could have something that looks like this. Notice that negative 5 is not in the parentheses. This is telling us that it is only the 5 that is squared, and that we want to take the opposite of that. Well, 5 squared is 25, and the opposite of that is negative 25. Let's try another one. Negative 4 to the third power. Again, we want just to cube the 4, and then we're going to take the opposite of that. 4 cubed is 64. The opposite of that is negative 64. So hopefully we can see how those two are different. Okay, we have one more part of the lesson that we need to tackle, and that is when we have to evaluate an expression, something kind of like this. So the directions will say evaluate. We know that means just plug it in and solve the best we can. So our expression is going to be x, z, over negative y. Okay, so then of course you need to know what the values are. X will be 10, y will be negative 2, and z is going to be negative 5. So our job is to plug in these three values and solve, but we have to be careful with this right here. But let's deal with the numerator first. So it said our value for x is 10. So instead of an x, I'm gonna substitute in a 10. I'm just gonna plug it into parentheses there. Smash together means we're gonna have to multiply. Z was negative 5, so I'm gonna plug that in. Now here's the tricky part. I want you to circle or highlight if you have one handy. I don't have one handy. Circle that negative sign, okay? So that's telling us it wants the opposite of y. Well, right now, y is a negative 2. So the opposite of that negative 2 is a positive 2. From here, we can start to evaluate. Remember, we solved the entire numerator first. 10 times 5 is 50 over 2. But did I forget something?